Welcome to another edition of the Heron Outlet. She is Alex Winley. He is Austin Robillard. I am Ian Heston. Guys, let's just jump right into it. The big news of the day. Federico Higuain retiring after a wonderful career in MLS. 10 years, the 2012 Newcomer of the Year, a 2015 MLS Cup final where he started and was really a bright spot for Columbus Crew in a mostly defensive match. And got to spend the past year and change here in Miami with his brother Gonzalo, getting to close out his career at age 36, I believe. I think he turns 37 coming up, or he might have already turned 37. Okay, thank you for the correction. But a very emotional press conference that just concluded. Many tears of joy and appreciation for just a good guy. I think we can all agree. Just your initial thoughts on Federico, who will play in the game on Saturday. Won't be going to the Revs a week from now, but a nice send off for him tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that as an Inter Miami fan slash journalist, analyst, whatever you want to call it, I feel pretty honored to have gotten to watch him play for a club that is my local club. I think that there are times where he showed absolute brilliance on the pitch, much more than anyone else probably has produced on a consistent level. Every time he's on the field, he's a threat, and that's kind of the story of his career. He's just been so consistently quality for so long, and it even goes off the pitch. He's just always a class act, a really nice, humble guy. Um, one of the players that MLS will remember for a really, really long time, and for his storied career. I think we said it a little bit. I mean, MLS Hall of Famer. I think you've got to put it in the books. He is up there, and I think as Inter Miami people, we should be honored to have had the chance to see him play with our badge, and for him to captain the team going into Saturday's match. Gregory, I think, offered that up to him, that he's going to captain and lead the team out onto the field. I think that that's really awesome, and it'll be a really nice celebration of a career for Federico, and all the best to him in his future endeavors, which I'm hearing now is coaching possibly. Don't know if that'll be with Inter Miami, but I heard that he is looking to do something like that, and getting his licenses or badges, whatever you want to call it. So congratulations to Federico Higuain, absolutely class player, class guy, and we are honored. I will say, I'll speak for myself. I'm very honored to have seen you play for Inter Miami. I'm sure you guys feel the same way, and definitely won't be forgotten. What a guy!
Yeah, it was an absolute blessing to have Federico on Inter Miami. He's an MLS legend, crew legend. He's played for DC United as well, and watching him for Inter Miami, he just brought a calming presence to the team that was missing a lot this season. It was an absolute pleasure to cover him, pleasure to watch him. Honestly, it's kind of sad that he is retiring, but bittersweet in a way because he was such a great player. He brought a lot of good qualities to Inter Miami. He's well liked in the locker room. He's absolutely a joy to talk to cover, and it's unfortunate, but it's a new new career stage for him. While we won't be able to see him on the pitch, like Austin said, he is getting his coaching badges, and Neville did mention that Inter Miami would give him the platform to be able to flex his coaching muscles a little bit. So while Federico the player will not be a thing anymore, Federico Ewing the coach will be coming soon, and if he's any good at that as he was a player, he'll have a phenomenal coaching career.
So, guys, let's just talk about Atlanta, which basically completely eliminated them from the playoffs. Technically not mathematically, 2-1 loss to Atlanta, where they took a 1-0 lead, but they'll need to make up, I think, something like an 18 goal differential in the next two games. So that's not happening anytime soon. It just they took the lead early. They looked fine in the first half. It wasn't overly impressive. You would have thought that they wanted to have a little more of an attack, especially in a game that they needed to win. And just that second half, we've seen it time and time again with this team. That second half collapse where they just can't have anything go their ways, and pretty much a little bit of a coda on this season, a little bit apropos of what this team has been. A lot of the infighting on the field, hints and emotion, and just kind of the collapse and the not tracking back and the blaming each other. A lot of that just really reflective in a 2-1 loss that basically ends Inter Miami's season for 2021.
Yeah, and I just want to get this out of the way, and this might be a little bit of a hot take, and I'm ready to take all the heat for it. The reason Inter Miami lost this game was not because of Phil Neville. It was not because of Phil Neville's team selection. It was not because of Phil Neville's formation in the first half that was ended up switching to a 4-2-3-1 in the second half. The 5-4-1, yes, as defensive as it was, Miami did get the lead. They had a ton of chances in the first half that they should have put away. There was a Lewis Morgan chance. There was Gonzalo Higuain threw on goal one-on-one with Brad Guzan, and probably a couple others too. I think that the Lewis Morgan chance actually had like a point 0.4 xg. By the way, I
Yeah,
saw on a
0.46. Yeah, I
yeah,
couldn't believe
like
that
that,
that ball did not go in.
it,
Yeah.
and he couldn't put it into the back of the net. So it had
Well,
nothing to do. And not
just to
only that,
explain
but
for people, just to explain for people, that means that that chance 40% of the time results in a goal. Right.
right.
So okay,
So
continue.
it's
Sorry.
a very high goal scoring chance, and there were multiple of those in the first half. And as defensive as you think it was, and how much possession they gave away to Atlanta in that first half, Atlanta only ended the half with a point like 2.5 xg, and they did not give up many chances. The defense was working really well. They were mitigating all of those chances for Atlanta, and then countering extremely well. So I don't think that Neville got this game wrong by any means. What ended up happening was a silly foul at the end of the box with some confusion on the line with Nico Figal in the wall and all of that. It was a stupid decision by Kelvin Leerdam, but it happened. It maybe gave up a shot on target, but then you ended up scoring from the free kick, so it is what it is. And then when you go 1-1 and you're in that minute where, okay, it's 50th, 60th minute, and we need to win the game, Phil Neville has to make a risky substitution, and the back line could not get intact in time. Literally 2 seconds after the formation was switched and the substitutions came on, LGP and McCoon were beaten by one through ball from Araujo into Joseph Martinez. And Martinez is always going to finish that chance, and that's kind of what the downfall was. And there were a bunch of chances in the second half as well. I'm not saying that the 4-2-3-1 didn't work in the second half, because going, you know, as the minutes went on, there were a ton of chances for Miami that they could not put away, and that's the story of the season for me. Not anything really about Phil Neville and his tactics and what he's done this season. It's more about why were they not efficient in the final third. And I think Phil Neville's talked about it. It's the big time players not being able to get the big time numbers that they should be getting. And so I don't think that was what was wrong. And those are just my thoughts. I don't know if you guys agree, but I'm very disappointed with the result, obviously. But I think that there will be brighter days going into 2022.
Yeah, I do agree. Neville gets a lot of flack, and sometimes it's deserved, but this game it absolutely wasn't. I tweeted earlier before that match. I could see why he went with that back three. It's because Nico Figal was back, and he wanted that 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 calmness and that defensive ability in the middle of the pitch to nullify, Barco and Josef Martinez and whatnot. But like Austin said, as soon as Figal was taking off and they switched to that flat back four, it was a simple through ball through the middle that was it Joseph Martinez finished, and that's how they ended up winning the game. And while switching to the 4-2-3-1 attacking wise, it did make sense, but as soon as he took off that one center back, it lost a lot of defensive stability, and I see people blaming Neville for that. And I'm it's just sometimes some of the criticism that he gets, it's not warranted, because like you said, a lot of these players need to start finishing their chances. You've got guys like Gonzalo Higuain, Rodolfo Pizarro, Matuidi wasn't playing, but for large chunks of the season, Gonzalo has showed up at times, but it's not nearly as consistent. Rodolfo Pizarro, essentially, the club spent $2 million on him, and he's not panned out the way they thought. And Matuidi, he's a central midfielder, but essentially he's regressing and he's getting older and he's not nearly as good enough anymore. But Neville has to play to the players at his roster, and this was the same issue with Diego Alonso going back next year. He didn't have a real say in the roster build, and at the time, I think I did say that the club was not in the right for getting rid of him because he didn't have a complete say in the roster build. But and with Neville, it's the same thing. This roster, three of the DPs that are here, they're not players that he probably wouldn't have picked up anyway. So Neville dealt with a lot this season. Yes, he could have done things better, but based on some of the quotes coming out of this press conference this morning, he, besides these next two games that end the season, he is in full 2022 mode. You see it in his eyes. He's talked to Chris Henderson. He's talked to the ownership group. They want to make a cup run. So this offseason, I believe he said January 7th in regards to, I don't know if that was preseason or just when the players have to report back. But yeah, this offseason is going to go quick and fast. And we already see it with some of these rumors with a couple of these Brazilian players. And yeah, it's just going to go very quickly. And don't be surprised if you see a lot of these players that are currently on the roster just get shipped out because of wage bill or just different fit and whatnot. Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting offseason for Inter Miami in that regard.
And very quickly, I want to address those like Neville out things because Alex, you made a really good point. Diego Alonso came in and did not have a roster that he built, and Phil Neville has come in and he did not have a roster that he really had time to touch on and not that he built. Surely, you cannot, as an expansion side, go into year 3 with a third coach who will not have time to build a roster. It's just not feasible and it's not going to work. And I agree with you, Alex. At the end of last season, literally as right after the Nashville game, I tweeted out an entire thread as I was sitting in the airport about why Diego Alonso should still be the manager of Inter Miami. And it basically had to do with he has proven himself to be a winner, but also at the same time, he has not been able to do what he's wanted to do with the players and his selection and all that kind of stuff. Give him an offseason to get players in. And now that that is gone and dusted and we can't go back and change the past, I look at Phil Neville and it's almost the exact same situation where they're finishing 10th or 11th in the East. Phil Neville didn't get to build this roster. He has plans for the future. Let's give him time in the offseason to push forward and figure things out. And I do think that Phil Neville tactically might be a little bit better than Diego Alonso, and that might be a hot take as well, but I think he's figured things out in a quicker pace than Diego Alonso did, and that's just more of the reason why Neville should stay. Compared to all the other points I've already just made, and give him an offseason to do what he needs to do. They know what the future of this club has to be due to the sanctions. Younger, fresher. That's an exact quote from Phil Neville in today's press conference. He said the team's going to be younger and fresher, hopefully going into next year. So that's just my thoughts on Neville in, not out.
I want to play devil's advocate just for a sec. I know that you guys know that I agree with you on all of those, and I think that Phil should be given the time to really do this roster rebuild. But let's just play devil's advocate because I do think to a certain extent that Phil has set expectations. He's trying to damper them a lot. He talks a lot about how the sanctions are going to affect them. Well, the sanctions haven't affected them yet. You could make the argument at least that Matuidi has like been available this whole year. So and Pellegrini was sent on loan. So it didn't affect like this year and what they were gonna do. Yeah, for the next 2 years I could understand that, but this year's disappointment shouldn't really play into that. So how much of it is him lowering the bar so that if he doesn't succeed, we're still having this same conversation a year or two down the line, still saying, oh, he needs the chance, oh, he had the sanctions, oh, he wasn't able to do it, if this team is still not making the playoffs.
I just think he's being realistic. I don't think he's dampering expectations. I think any coach would struggle under these conditions, and I know it sounds like an excuse, but with Inter Miami specifically, you look at expansion teams like Nashville, for instance. They've had their entire roster build completely different from Inter Miami, and they're doing fine. But at the same time, they're not dealing with the sanctions and some of their older DPs that don't contribute enough. I think Neville saying that was tempering expectations in a way where you know they do want to make a cup run, but at the same time there are limitations to this roster just because they won't be able to spend as much money as they normally would. However, I will say if when they do bring in new players and it's, let's say, next season they continue to go on these losing streaks and they don't really improve anymore, then that's when you think about, okay, maybe we should bring in another coach and whatnot. But as far as it goes right now, I think Neville, he's in the right to say that because any coach would struggle under these conditions. But at the same time, um, we've got to realize that because of the sins of previous front office employees at Inter Miami, Neville now has to deal with this, and he's basically him and Chris Henderson basically has a mess on their hands, and yeah, it'll be difficult for them to get out of. But like we saw with Take the Colorado Rapids for example. Their wage bill is not nearly as high as Inter Miami, and they look like MLS Cup contenders. So it's going to be difficult, but it's not impossible.
That's a good point. I mean, I look at it at what Nashville has done. I look at what Colorado has done, and we think of Inter Miami more in the terms of Galaxy or Sounders or the New York clubs, like these big market clubs. But you can do it. You can be successful doing it the way that Minnesota has been pretty consistent. They haven't had the trophies, but they've been pretty consistent up there. Let's be honest, the Revs just won the Supporters Shield and are setting all sorts of records. And they're notoriously the Buffalo Bills of Major League Soccer. So there's a way, and congratulations to them. That's a really impressive streak. Teams normally do not, or never, let's be honest, never do what the Revs have done. So what they've done this season has been really smart, but they've done it with lesser known players. I don't think a lot of us had Carlos Gil on our radar like 3-4 years ago. And so I think that there are two ways to skin this cat. There are two ways to do this where they can be completely successful even through the sanction time, which is kind of why I wanted to play devil's advocate there. But Austin, I wanted to turn to you on this. The quote that really stuck out to me from the press conference was, for me, that was the part that I found interesting. For me, tomorrow starts the rebuild. That's a quote from Phil. And I think that we all can kind of understand that. But for the coach to come out and say, for me, tomorrow starts the rebuild. Okay, well, start the rebuild for me, Austin. What does that mean tomorrow's game looks like? Who are we going to see that we haven't seen? And who is going to get dropped because they're no longer in the plans for the rebuild?
I think, well, just based off team selection, you don't have everybody at your disposal, but at the same time, Phil Neville, around the time of that quote, was saying players' attitudes are going to matter. They need to show me that they want to be here next year, and any of the players that may be on the fringe or maybe players that need to prove more to Phil Neville, they kind of have to play and they have to play well. And I guess a couple of those guys that I'm looking at, maybe Julian Carranza, LGP, Figal, Alvarado maybe get some minutes, Kelvin Leardom. There are just a lot of those players that are on the edge, and you go into 2022 saying, should I be paying you this kind of money to underperform, essentially? I mean, and yeah, I guess one person I definitely miss is Rodolfo Pizarro. There's a lot of half the roster almost would make up these players that are on the fringe for me. Players that need to prove themselves in these last two games, which is why Phil Neville is saying the rebuild starts. It's all about these players proving to Neville that they deserve to be on Inter Miami in 2022 and 2023, whether they should renew their contract if it's expiring or whether they should not try and ship them out if their contract is, past this deadline. So that for me is what's going to be really important. And I think on top of the entire Federico Higuain ceremony, you're going to see, I'm hoping you're going to see a more inspired Inter Miami team against New York City FC. They've always struggled going against this side, and I think that potentially it could be no different. But at the same time, you still need to put out a good performance and prove to the gaffer that you deserve to be on Inter Miami in 2022. Granted, if you want to.
Part of me wants to see, the Sambi Guediris, Edison Asconas get some minutes tomorrow or even start because, yes, Inter Miami are mathematically, there's still a chance of the playoffs, but realistically, those chances are done. But I'd like to see some of the younger players on the roster get some minutes, Indiana Vasilev alongside maybe Federico. I don't know if Phil will go full out and start, all three of the DPs. If they don't start, the starting lineup tomorrow will be very telling to see who will be here next year, because Phil has always talked about passion and energy and wanting to be here. So the starting 11, whatever he picks, it's going to be more or less telling of who won't be here come 2022. So I think that's another important note. But yeah, I'd like to see the roster get the starting 11 get a bit younger, a bit more mobile. Maybe Ventura Alvarado starts. we don't know. But yeah, I agree. There's just a lot of players on this roster that have underperformed and not have they've not lived up to their price tag. So it's going to be rough, but hopefully tomorrow they can put in a good performance to send off Federico.
If players are dropped tomorrow, are you going to take that as a sign that they are not in the plans for the future? Because I guess I just wonder how much are we going to be reading into this now? Now that we know that there is going to be this quote unquote rebuild, if there is that odd name that doesn't, if Lewis Morgan, just hypothetically, if that happens, are you good? No, but like, I'm not saying that. I probably even shouldn't have thrown that name out. I'm just saying, like, hypothetically, if there is, that's all I'm saying is if there is a guy that isn't on the field, if Nick Marsman doesn't start, I'm just like completely spitballing names here. I'm not saying anything, reporting anything whatsoever. Do not read into what I just said. But I'm just saying, if there is a guy that is left off, are we going to be reading into is this person in the plans for the future or not? Because it could just wind up being a rotational squad thing. And we're gonna go crazy and say, oh, is this person in? Is this person out? Are we in there, or should I have just not done any of the past 30 seconds that I just did?
Well, first of all, I would say that it is already happening. We're already reading into it, and we're reading into quotes from a midweek, or not midweek, a mid-game week press conference, and then two, it's our jobs to read into it. This is what we need to do. We need to dive into this kind of stuff because I think that there is a purpose for everything, and Phil Neville is definitely he's taking an approach to this where he's being honest about it to the media, honest about it to the public, honest about it to the fans, and I think that everything he does is from this point on is going to be strategic for himself. And then, yeah, we should read into a lot of these decisions that he's going to make in these last two games because I think it will be very telling. Just to shorten up this answer, it's going to be telling going into next year. Absolutely.
See, there's where I disagree with you. I'm not reading into any of it. I don't, that's why I threw out probably the two most solidified names because, like, to me, like, you can't really judge. They're out of it. And so a guy like,
Well,
let's
let me
say,
ask you
Lewis,
this.
like I talked about. What?
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. So players that are on the fringe, let's say Ventura Alvarado gets minutes and Julian Carranza gets minutes over. We won't do it against, I'm sure, against Gonzalo Higuain. But let's just say that happens. That Carranza starts and Alvarado starts, and Makun is dropped, and Alvarado's playing next to LGP and Figo. Are we not reading into? I'm just flipping it now. I'm not reading about people leaving, but people
I'm
possibly
not. I'm
staying.
not going to.
Alvarado and Carranza.
I'm not
No.
going
Okay,
to
and then
because I don't think that it's necessarily indicative of their departure. I think it might be indicative of wanting to see them get minutes to see what you have there, but
yeah. Okay.
not indicative of whether they're coming or going.
Okay, fair enough. And I think that even for the players, though, I think that they're probably themselves are probably reading into it and saying, okay, I need to put on a performance after our head coach has just told everybody in the media that we're playing for our contracts and on an Inter Miami team going into 2022. So that for me is something that I'm looking into, but I understand your point entirely.
See, I will say that Neville, even though he did mention that tomorrow will be an intro to 2022, he still wants to win these games. He said, past these next two games, after that, I'm focused, even though he did say that tomorrow would be a preview. I still think he'll go with a full strength squad and try to win this game. And that's why I said it'll be telling if he puts out a full strength squad, but doesn't put out, the DPs that have been underperforming, Pizarro, Matuidi, and whatnot. I think that's in that way that's going to be really telling because Neville still wants to win these games. He's a head coach; he wants to win. But you guys make interesting points about that. I don't think if Lewis Morgan hypothetically I guess gets dropped,
I definitely
he's
should
played.
not have thrown out a name on
Yeah,
that one. I
Well,
will.
think
yeah
about it.
Morgan.
If Lewis Morgan is dropped, let's say if it does happen, that means okay, he's solidified for 2022. We're not going to waste our
Yeah,
players on two games
No.
that are meaningless, right?
even then
Is
he's
that what
played
that means?
in he's played in almost every game this season. He deserves a rest, so I wouldn't take that like personally.
I don't want to say that they're meaningless because I think that they're actually extremely meaningful because
They're meaningless
let's
for players that you name, like Nick Marsman and Lewis Morgan. That's what I'm thinking. I think they're
no,
meaningless
but
for
I
players
I
like
think
that.
that they're meaningful for them too because you look at who they're playing. They're not playing nobodies. They're playing New
That's
York
true.
City, which to me is actually one of the most, if not the most talented team, at least in the East, at least in a weekend East. I think that they are extremely talented, and I think that they have a very sneaky chance at making a cup run if they can figure out the last 2 weeks to get into this thing. And I think that on the road at the greatest regular season team of all time that will be celebrating winning the supporter shield in front of you before the game, which is what's going to happen. The Revolution will be celebrating winning the supporter shield before the game, the last day of the season. I think that those are extremely helpful in terms of figuring out, wait a minute, we have nothing to play for, but we can also be, I don't know, spoilers to a certain extent, but we can at least show that we're not going to be bullied. And I think so. I think that there's a lot of value in these last two games, especially from a manager like Phil, who is trying to get that locker room to say, "Hey, you need to impress me." And it's about time that you show me what you can do. Otherwise, it's go time. And so I think that you can learn a lot from these games. I still think that there's stuff to play for.
Like I said, I agree, but in terms of, I think it's different on every player's, like, during the course of this year, we know who is likely to stay, right? And we know who the players are that are 50-50 or 75, whatever. Lewis Morgan and Nick Marsman, just to use the easiest examples, are two guys that I know Miami are going to retain for next year. And this is obviously not reporting, but based on what I've seen this season and what they have meant to the club, those are two guys that I would say are very key. Does it make sense to give John McCarthy minutes? Absolutely not. But does it make sense to drop Lewis Morgan and give Vasilev, a lone player who you're going to hopefully work on trying to keep, and Robbie Robinson minutes, your young guy who you drafted 2 years ago going into 2022 needs to be better? Does it make sense to drop Lewis Morgan? Because for Lewis Morgan, it's technically, in my opinion, meaningless for him to play in these matches, as he's already proven himself to be a solidified player in this roster, for two players like Vasilev and Robinson, who you have to work with in the offseason. That's why my perspective on it is.
Yeah, and let's say Pizarro starts instead of Robbie. I don't think that's an indicator that Robbie is gonna leave the club. It's maybe due to injury, or maybe Neville's giving Pizarro one last chance. There's just several uh reasons why players could get dropped and start. But yeah, tomorrow's roster, regardless of who starts, will be very interesting, and we will definitely be dissecting that no matter what happens.
So, guys, as we start to wrap up the show, Inter Miami currently would have the number 8 pick in the MLS Super Draft. They could go as high as 6. They could actually fall as much as like 15, depending on if they win out and everything sort of goes their way. So, but they're most likely, San Jose and them are 1 point apart in that 7-8 matchup for it. Just wanted to know if as we're following the college soccer season, as we're going, Florida International is having a fantastic season, by the way. So if you're out to FIU, check them out. They're number 17 in the nation right now. So definitely a very good season for them. There are some guys that I have put. I'm just pulling it up on my radar. Useni Buddha from Stanford is a nice winger. If you check him out. Papa Ndoye is a forward from SMU. Ousmane Silla from Clemson also might be an attractive option at central midfield. And then in the back, there's a guy for FIU, which is why I brought them up. Kareem Riley, who is from Trinidad, who is a big, tall center back that is really, reminds you of Mabika and reminds you of like very similar style of play, and might actually be available. Might be one of those ones that Inter Miami starts to consider. He plays for FIU. Just some of the early names. I don't know how closely we all follow college soccer. If we get out there. I live down the street from Lynn, so I get to watch them. They're a pretty good program down here in South Florida. So what do we think? Are there anybody that you're keeping an eye out on as we talk? I know that the teams are moving a little bit away from the Super Draft now, but How much do you think that it'll impact it having a top pick in the draft? And is it too early to start saying, oh, if I catch a game on ESPNU one Saturday afternoon or Friday evening, maybe this person will be there, maybe that person will be there?
Yeah, this is always a fun time of the year because all those names that you named, I have no idea about. But within the next 2 months, I'm going to learn everything and anything about them and figure out what Inter Miami could use. And I think I look back at the first two drafts, Robbie Robinson and Dylan Nealis, and then the second draft with Josh Penn, who was actually drafted above Mabika, which we might be a little surprised by considering Mabika might be a regular starter in next season. Go
Just to
ahead.
point to that, Miami FC closes out their season at Charleston Battery this weekend, and so
Oh,
Penn might be in that game playing against Miami FC.
yeah. So, and it's interesting, and I believe from that same draft, I think Segrist was a top 5 pick from the Robbie Robinson draft, or a top 10 pick, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, to the Red Bulls, and then we traded for him. I think he was the number 10 pick, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken, but I think he was a number 10 pick. Haven't looked at that to fact check it, but yeah. So there are players that you can grab, and there are players that you can hopefully develop, like we're trying to do with Robbie Robinson here. We tried to do with 1 year for Dylan Nealis, and now we are definitely doing with Mabika. So it's an interesting time of the year. It's a time to really dig in on research, and it's a lot of fun. But in terms of how Miami should approach the draft, having, let's say, a potential top 10 pick, do we go? I want to ask this to you guys. Do we go positionally, or do we go talent? Because I think that they have a lot of, with what they're going to do in this offseason, they're going to have people that they want to bring in to bolster the squad right away. So do you just take the best talent and try to develop them for the future, or do you draft somebody for a position in the draft to have as a depth piece?
I think position wise, there's rarely an MLS draft player that starts right away and has an impact. Usually takes them a year. Look at Robbie. Mabika next year he'll probably be a starter. Segrist, Josh Penn, and whatnot. So I think they go positionally. I don't think it's if there's a good striker available, you draft him because. Gonzalo Higuain may be here next year. There maybe Carranza will. Mitch Curry will probably get called up. There's several instances of maybe yeah, sure, it's the best talent, but it's not necessarily a position of need. Like Inter Miami needs a winger, they need a central midfielder, they need another right back, they need several other positions around the pitch. And maybe drafting the best winger in the draft would be okay, but is he going to get minutes over Lewis Morgan? Definitely not. So I think if there's a good eh, positionally, they need to draft positionally. Let's say if there's a highly rated central midfielder, you go and take that guy. So I'm curious to see what Inter Miami will do because Chris Henderson, he's a wizard when it comes to MLS and the draft. So I'm curious to see what happens.
I know that I agree with you, Alex, but I know also that like that a lot of the fan base is disappointed that they're going to go more this player development route than these big star name route. It's pragmatic; it makes sense. And we saw when they went entirely in the opposite direction how bad that wound up being. It wound up having them get the largest sanction in league rules and regulations history. So I think that it's the smart way to go. But I wonder, are you guys like disappointed that they're doing that, or would you have? I guess we just think logically, and a fan thinks emotionally a little bit more. But is there any disappointment that that's just going to be the way that it's going to go for the next couple of years?
No,
I yeah, oh, go
for
ahead,
me,
Al.
no. For
Yeah.
me, no. I think there's a lot of value in developing players. In Miami is such a soccer hotbed. South Florida in general is such a soccer hotbed. It's only a matter of time before an academy player comes up to the first team and whatnot. And even with non-local players, there's like we said earlier, there's been rumors about a couple of Brazilian players that we did a video on John Mata. He's a good depth piece for not a lot of money. And with these sanctions, that's the route Miami will be going on for the future, especially with Chris Henderson in the office. You look at Seattle, look at guys like João Paulo, who he's not a star, but he's making his case for a league MVP. And while fans may not like that, maybe they'll clamor after I don't know. I'll just throw out a random name, Marco Verratti or someone like that. someone famous like that, even though he's a big name, he may not be what's right for Inter Miami. So I think as we move forward, even after the sanctions with Chris Henderson, this will be a route that Miami will continue to take. Just getting really good, uh, recruiting and scouting will be key to all of this. And there's good players for not a lot of not $12 million Rodolfo Pizarro money. So I think fans need to reshift their thinking when it comes to this, because this is the route that Miami will start to take heading into next season.
Oh,
Sorry.
Austin, I didn't know if you wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, no, I think that I'm not disappointed with how they've approached it at all. I think well, I'm disappointed with Nealis, but with guys like trading for Seagrass, who was a top 10 pick, loaning out Josh Penn, using Mabika and Fort Lauderdale CF. I think that's more of the, like you said, Ian, a realistic approach that Miami should take, because it's going to help development, but also not hurt you on the pitch in MLS if they're not ready. So there are multiple ways to try and develop guys. Miami is trying to become, one of the best development academies, or whatever you want to call it, in the league. And if you're going to draft young guys, and they're going to be young, and MLS in the Super Draft has not always produced starting talent right away, like you said, Alex, I think that I'm going to counter your point by saying, if they're not going to start right away, why worry about position when you can get the talent for the future? So that's like a counterpoint to that. Now, I do think Miami do need positions, and there are positions of need. I'm not going to disagree with that, but I think that if you're going to take this developmental route, and you're going to use Fort Lauderdale CF, and you're going to use a USL for loans, and you're going to, I guess, trade away Dylan Nealis to Nashville, whatever it is, to try and get some GAM back, you can use these young players to your advantage, not for right now, but for the future, if you're going to take the development route.
And I think, just to wrap it up on that point, I was reminded of a quote that Phil said about a month ago, where he said, other teams are watching our players to see, where they're going to go in the offseason, but we're also watching other teams' players. And we understand that this is a scouting. We need to make ourselves understanding who's going where and who's available, not just in the draft, but also in the transfer portal. It's portal. This isn't college football, but transfer market. But yeah, so I think that that's a lot of what is going to be the sweat equity minutes that are going to come in the next coming weeks and months. On that note, too, the USL Championship does start next weekend. Miami FC locked into that fourth seed. They'll most likely play Birmingham Legion, but there is a chance, which I am hoping for, where they get to play the MLS team that is not an MLS team, Louisville City, in their first round game, because I think that would be a lot of fun to have that rivalry continue as things get heated up. Just give us something to talk about as we look into it. He is Austin Robillard. She is Alex Winley. I am Ian Hest for our producer, Andres. Thank you so much for joining us on the Heron Outlet, and we'll see you back here this time next week.